Good afternoon. It is a pleasure of mine to be in your home tonight for the Southern AIDS Coalition's virtual Black Print series. Tonight's discussion, Say It at the Polls, will be about engaging Black LGBTQ individuals around voting and the issues that have come up in this particular election. My name is Marvell Terry. I go by pronouns he, him, his, and I am the founder of the Saving Ourselves Symposium. I have an amazing group of activists and community leaders with me tonight, and I will allow them to introduce themselves momentarily. But before we do that, I want to pause and ask that you please go to the Southern AIDS Coalition's Facebook page and please share this conversation so that we can deepen our audience on this evening. I will pause and do it from my phone. I have posted it from my phone. The panelists today will post it from their phone. Again, engage in the conversation. Please put your comments in the chat box today. Tell your friends to come on and let's have a watch party. Again, I have some amazing panelists with me today. They are both friends and colleagues of mine in some capacity. I've had an opportunity to work with all of them, and I'm so excited to have them with me today. I will allow them to introduce themselves in a way that is most comfortable for them in this moment. I will start with Jasmine.
Hello. My name is Jasmine Tasaki. I am the Executive Director and founder of WeCareTN, right here in Memphis, Tennessee.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for joining us. Next up, Bishar.
Hi, my name is Bishar Jenkins Jr. I'm a legislative fellow in Congresswoman Frederica Wilson's office. She represents the 24th Congressional District of Florida.
Awesome. And next we have Devin.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. My name is Devin Barrington-Ward, and I have the privilege of serving as the Managing Director of the group and a senior organizer with the Movement for Black L and Southern AIDS Coalition for the opportunity to speak with you all this evening.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you all for joining us. We wanted to definitely amplify individuals that are facing Hurricane Zeta right now in Louisiana as well in Georgia. And so we think about our friend here, Devin Barrington-Ward, who is joining us today from his home in Atlanta, Georgia, or someone's home in Atlanta, Georgia, because the power is out. And so we definitely have you in our thoughts at this moment, Devin. And so many people, so many of our friends who are in Atlanta or New Orleans who are experiencing this storm. Often when I start conversations, I recognize that as activists and advocates, we are running throughout the entire day. And finally, when we get to these type of conversations, we are exhausted. And so for a brief moment, and if you can, out in the audience, if you could do a meditation exercise that I like to do, is simply stabilizing our feet, putting our feet flat on the floor if you can. You might be listening while you're driving, but if you can, at home, please put your feet flat on the floor. If you can breathe in with me and breathe out. We're going to breathe in one more time and breathe out and do it one more time. Breathe in, breathe out. Thank you for that. So we are in the midst of an election. This Tuesday is election day, but election time or season has already started. We are experiencing record-breaking early voting for so many populations. I want to ask our panelists, which elections have you been watching very closely up and down the ballot? If that's local, regional, national elections that you've been watching, which elections have you been watching up and down the ballot?
Personally, I've been watching the national election, the presidential election, Although we should be watching our local elections closely as well, I think with so much going on and all that we've gone through as a country in this last 4 years, specifically since COVID started this year, I think I was just more engaged and interested to see how the public was receiving candidates and how people engage with early voting. I did early vote, and I hope everybody did. But if not, you still got time.
Devin, which elections have you been watching?
I have been watching here locally in Georgia, not any specific elections particularly, but I've been watching what counties specifically do here in Metro Atlanta. We're looking at the potential of Georgia being won by a Democrat, the first Democrat since 1992. The last one was Bill Clinton for president. And so I'm interested to see what the shift in demographics in Metro Atlanta means for all of the down ballot races. So I'll be watching counties like Cobb County. I'll be watching counties like Gwinnett. I'll be watching counties like Henry. And I will also be watching other rural areas of the state in Middle and South Georgia, because there has been a concerted effort, particularly by leaders like Stacey Abrams through her last run for governor and her work as executive director of Fair Fight, to really engage in election defense and protection work throughout the state, and engage communities that haven't traditionally always been engaged by the Democratic establishment. So I'll be looking to see how areas that traditionally lean Republican, how they may be shifting with the demographics.
Awesome. And Bishar, any particular elections you're watching right now?
So I'm watching all the Senate races, quite honestly, because I think it's critically important that we not just win the presidency, but that we have a Democratic Senate as well. And so one race that I've been particularly watching is some of these Republicans that have not stood up to Donald Trump and who are seen as sort of moderates, and they are not going to benefit from not standing up to him. And I think their electorates are not happy with them. So if you look at Susan Collins, who is almost always disappointed and concerned, but never actually doing anything about what she's concerned about. And I think people are just tired of that. Like, we have 200,000, 225,000 people dead of the coronavirus. You have a president that's trying to turn the country into an autocracy. What we need is not like, we don't need moderate politicians that are gonna, play both sides. Like, we need people that are gonna be very clear about what the issues are and what needs to happen. And so I'm watching, a lot of these candidates that haven't been speaking out, and I think they're gonna, I think a lot of them are gonna lose their elections because they've been too afraid to speak out, but I think they need to lose.
Good. We also know that there are a couple other important elections in Tennessee. You have Marquita Bradshaw, who is running for a Senate seat. That is a very important race. Reverend Ralph Warnock in Georgia, as Devin mentioned, those are some very important races. Mike Epsy in Mississippi. That is a very important race. And so there are a lot of important races that we have been engaged in or should be engaged in during this time. I want to ask our panelists, how important is it for us as Black LGBTQ people to be concerned up and down the ballot, not just about the presidential race, but how important is it for us to be concerned up and down the ballot, and how does that impact our lives?
I'll go first again. I think it's very important, but I think that what we need to understand as Black people, we need to educate our people around politics as a whole, not just tell each other who to vote for and not just vote for who's Black, and not depend on a family member or friend to engage us, and also for their family member or friend to explain to us how politics works. I think that that's something that we're missing as a people, but it's extremely important that we be concerned up and down the ballot. And if all this fails, at least those organic conversations that happen among family and friends, those do help. But I think that organizations and people, Black people specifically in power, in any area of power, should be trying to educate our community around politics. Because before we can ask somebody to vote, they have to know what they're voting about and voting for, and how those representatives show up in politics and what they can do and what their job entails.
Gotcha. And I just wanted to explain, and Devin and Bishar, you may have something to say, but when I talk about up and down the ballot, and for our listeners who may not know what that phrase means, that means for your school board, for your city council, for your mayor, for your sheriff, for your state representatives, and your senators, your congressmen, all the way up to the president. And so that is starting in your local community, working all the way up to the presidential race. Devin, Bishar?
So I think about school board elections, and I'm thinking about this in the context of comprehensive sexual education and how important it is for these school boards to be reflective of the communities that they serve, and that they actually be open to an inclusive curriculum. And so what that means is that we need to be researching these folks that are going on these school boards. A lot of these folks come from our communities. You might be friends with them on Facebook. You might need to see how they talk about issues of sexuality before you decide to vote for them and put them on the curriculum, where they have impact over students that have of all genders and all sexualities. And so I think we need to keep in mind of school board elections, but I also think we need to think of, once again, Senate elections as it relates to court appointments. And when it comes to LGBTQ protections in particular, with Amy Coney Barrett on the court now, it's an uphill climb. And so our voting decisions have impact beyond just the term of office of the president that appoints these people. These folks are going to be on there for 30, 40 years. And so we need to keep that in mind too.
Yeah, that lifetime appointments. And so, Jasmine, you mentioned something very interesting at the top of your response. You talked about informing our community, and for the context of this conversation, to me, community in this discussion are Black LGBTQ individuals. How have you worked through this election cycle to inform community? Bishar, our other guest, how have you worked with community to inform them about what's happening?
Well, it's a little different for when I speak for my specific community. So that just means Black trans women. So I've been working all my life and involved all my life. I grew up with my grandparents and my aunts working at the polls. So that was a part of the Black community and how I engaged with voting there. So bringing it to the trans community, I had to realize that everybody's experience with civic engagement is different, right? And that impacts how they show up now as adults. So that I personally, at my organization, that's what we've been doing is political education sessions so that people can really understand the whole idea of politics. And then just allowing people space to make those decisions for themselves. I also grew up voting for who my family voted for, and because that's just it was a different time. There wasn't much representation. Now there's so much representation that you have to kind of find those intersectional issues and say, hey, do they really serve me in the intersection versus just somebody being Black and we rallying behind that one candidate. So that's how we have been addressing it here at WeCare.
Okay. Bishar, have you seen or participated or led any Get Out the Vote initiatives in your community or your current role?
So within the Congresswoman's office, Obviously, a lot of my work falls on the policy side,
Okay.
but what I've seen the Congresswoman do is really reaching out to young people, and I think we're actually seeing the benefits of that. I think last time I read that youth turnout is the highest it's been when it comes to early voting, which is encouraging. And so I think for us, it's really important that we speak to first-time voters, folks that have just registered to vote within the last couple of years, to really get them out to vote and to show them why it's critically important in this election. Because a lot of these folks, particularly folks around my age, like I'm 25, a lot of people in the last election didn't feel that either candidate spoke to them. And I think now we're sort of seeing the consequences of that. And so I think now younger people are more engaged and are more understanding about the consequences of elections when we've had a chaotic, to say the least, presidency the last 4 years. So,
and when you speak about young people in the last election, you're talking about the 2016 election between Hillary Rodham Clinton and Donald J. Trump.
Okay. And let's keep in mind, I just want to add to that point that in all of history, young people are at the front lines of every movement, right? So we are actually at a great point for, as Black people, we do have young people at the forefront of the movement, and a part of their movement is voting. So we are where we need to be.
Jasmine, that's good. We are where we need to be. And so when we talk about young people, how do we continue to engage young people or younger generations? I'll be 35 in 2 weeks. And so I consider myself that population or that demographic that is considered young. How do we continue to engage young people and younger generations in this voting process?
Can you all hear me now?
Yes. Welcome,
okay.
Devin.
Wonderful. All right. So sometimes the old school laptop can still get the job done. All right.
Yes.
So with that being said, I think when we're talking about engaging young people, I think we have to speak to the heart of the issues that are important to young people, and also recognize that young people, myself included, are tired of empty promises, tired of broken rhetoric. We're tired of the same old, same old. We're tired of elected officials talking about, particularly Black elected officials, championing reforms that are still getting Black people killed. We are tired of Black elected officials who are championing development deals that don't end up with a good deal for Black people in urban communities. We are tired of seeing manufactured crises in affluent areas of town receive more attention than the crises that have been happening in Black and brown communities for years that have been ignored. And so, no, we are not in a space where we want reforms. We want revolution. We want to reimagine institutions that have been broken. We want to reimagine them to work for the good of marginalized and oppressed people. And so that means that when folks are saying, yeah, we want to defund the police, to not shut that conversation down, but just to know what that actually means. We want to reimagine public safety. Okay, well, what does reimagining public safety actually mean? Because if you speak to Black, queer, and trans people, particularly Black trans women, they will talk to you about how the police do not protect them. The police do not, as many Black trans women who have been killed, the police oftentimes have found the murderers of these individuals, and oftentimes target Black trans women and create the situation where Black trans women are more at risk because they are enforcing vice laws and they are enforcing prostitution laws indiscriminately, without having the understanding that Black trans women are often denied the opportunity of traditional upward mobility to sustain themselves. And so young people are willing to engage in the electoral process and the civic process and civic conversations, but it can't be the same conversation. It can't be the same old rhetoric. It can't be the same old solutions. It can't be the same old people. And so we need to bring new voices, not to the table, but we need to create new tables for young people that are owned and operated by us. So we are truly setting the agenda and recognize that what we are calling radical oftentimes is what we really need to bring healing and a future where Black people are centered and appreciated in this country like we should have always been, that it oftentimes does require what some call a radical approach. One thing that I will say is that what is radical is not what we are asking for. What is radical is the status quo. The status quo is killing people. The status quo has people on the street. The status quo has Black trans women under constant threat of violence and terror. The status quo allows for the continuation of funding police, prisons, and jails and courts, having them receive more funding every year, while we defund education, healthcare, affordable housing, and all of the things that we know keep people safe. And so I think young people recognize that it's a day, and that some of us may have been born yesterday, but we stayed up all night, and we stayed up enough to know that this is BS.
Yes.
I agree, and I think, I love everything you said. I just want to add to that, we have to listen to the young Black voices, and we have to believe the young Black voices. So many times in politics and specifically within communities of Black people, you have the same community stakeholders forever, and like the people hold these places in community, and young people don't get a chance to thrive and evolve, right? So for us to engage young voters, we have to listen to their stories, and we have to let them tell their stories. And we can't just let the older generation push the narrative that they want to push and think that they're just going to get a young person that's going to do everything that they say. And when we already know that the majority of the old people that's in these positions are doing what the white man has told them to do for all of these years. So we have to trust the Black voice. We have to listen to the Black voice, and we have to nurture the Black voice.
And I think in particular, I think these politicians know how critically important our vote is, especially when in this election we're seeing that, for example, young Black men are sort of thought of as a swing vote. Like they're either not going to vote or they're going to vote for Biden. But it's that decision, like, do I vote for Biden or do I just not vote at all? And I think they understand, whereas in the past there weren't direct appeals to specific demographics like young Black men, but now you're seeing advertisements, for example, that are speaking directly to young Black men because they realize that they might not get our vote, with the same solutions, with the same appeals that have worked in the past aren't going to work anymore when we're dying daily and dying on camera in front of the entire world to see. And so I think now when we look at the political parties, I think they realize that now it's either now or never. If they don't deliver on their promises to Black people now, I think they understand that Black people might walk away and that they might not just give them their support. As they did in the past, particularly when it comes to the Democratic Party, and particularly when it comes to moderate Democratic politicians who haven't been progressive enough.
Wow. So y'all are giving me a whole lot to work with right now. So I'm trying to figure out which direction I want to go to next. But all three of you all talked about some key issues. And so my question is, do you see your issues on the ballot? Do you see, as a Black person, LGBTQ individual, do you, and all the other identities that we represent in the core of who we are, do you see your issues on the ballot? That could be a local, national, state elections. And what are your issues? So
I got a lot of issues, but I'm like 21 Savage. I got a lot,
Right.
but no. So for me, I'm 37 years old, Marvell. You right under me, so you can kind of identify. I vote in a way, and I look at candidates in a way that it's surface, right? For so many years and for so long of my life, my issues as a Black person were minimum, right? But my issues as a transgender Black woman were obsolete. So even now, where we're a part of the conversation, those issues are not centered. So I can't make a vote if I'm depending on my issues to be dead center of the conversation, right? So I think that comes with age, because a lot of younger people, that's why they don't vote, because they don't hear the issues that they want to hear. So for older people, when we've been voting longer, we try to find or assess the character of the person, of the candidate, versus them really discussing issues. So for me, I don't really see my issues at the center, but I do think that Black transgender women are now a part of the conversation. But I think that race is such a large part of the conversation now, where it has not been in prior elections nationally. Now locally, I see a lot of LGBT issues, because I see a lot of LGBT representation, you know, in the local elections, not just in Tennessee, but I'm saying local elections across the country are having more people from the LGBT community to run for office, right? We still have not yet to have a president who is gay, or somebody who is openly gay to run for presidency. So it's, for me, it depends on how you look at it, what election you're looking at. But yeah, I know some great people, and I voted for Marquita. I know some great people that are running, that have ran. Shout out to Devin. Like, when people run, it's such that, just that representation for me in the age group that I'm in is enough, right? Because it's a win that somebody thinks that much of themselves and their voice and their experience to go out and be on the front lines for somebody like me. So that's a win right there for me.
Good, good. We got that Memphis connection, because Devin, you know, you on my docket around your experience running for office, but we're going to come back to that. But just wanted to ask, do y'all see your issues on the ballot? Bishar, Devin, do you see your issues on the ballot?
Absolutely. When I think of being Black and queer and living with HIV, I think of our healthcare system. And, you know, in 10 days, there's going to be a decision before the Supreme Court deciding the fate of the Affordable Care Act. And if they decide to strike down that law, there are going to be millions of folks without healthcare insurance. And that just can't happen. It shouldn't happen. It's a disgrace if it happens. And so, yes, I think for me, like, I view this election as critically important, because I think what we're seeing is that this is about building on to the existing structures and systems, but also transforming them. Like, folks need help now when it comes to like the pandemic and things like that. But when it comes to like the healthcare system, like, we need healthcare for everyone. So we need to be doing like Medicare for all. And so that's being litigated through this election. Even though you have Biden that says that he's, you know, not going to do Medicare for all, but I think a lot of people view Biden as somewhat malleable, and that you can kind of work with him and persuade him on issues. And so I think we all know that with Donald Trump, there's no hope. There's like no hope whatsoever. And so when it comes to, and he has no healthcare plan, let's just be clear. He keeps talking about, well, I'm going to release it and this, that, and the other. He has nothing. And so for me, you know, if we're being very honest, healthcare is my number one issue.
Healthcare, okay. Devin?
Yeah, you know, I always tell people I'm voting Black. And so to vote in defense of Black lives, I vote for the Black politic. And so that means my issues are always on the ballot, because I force my issues to be on the ballot. And so it doesn't matter whether we're voting for school board, city council, or president. I'm always connecting my issues and the issues of my community to the races that are on the ballot. So there isn't an election where I don't see my issues on the ballot, because I'm going to force the people who are in my community to talk about my issues. You're not going to canvass in my neighborhood. You're not going to go door to door in my neighborhood. You're not going to blow up my mailbox with, campaign literature and not think that you're going to talk about the issues that are important to me and my neighbors. And so I think we really need to reshift our perspective and what we share with young people about voting, that somehow you have to wait for a candidate to put your issue on the ballot. No, you force the candidate to talk about your issues, so that way your issues are always front and center on the ballot. I look at it when folks are like, neither Joe Biden and definitely Donald Trump, no American president is going to be able to provide liberation for Black people. Liberation, I don't believe, comes through the White House, but is it impacted by what happens at the White House? Absolutely. And so I think I'm always encouraging people to vote for who you want to get in the ring with, because you're going to have to fight either of these people, right? And so to Bashir's point, talking about a Vice President Biden presidency, we're talking about someone that may be more malleable. I view it in the context of somebody who I may have a more honorable fight with, a more strategic fight, where I'm able to politically maneuver more wins for me and my community based on the posture of this particular person in an office. But I never have voted for anyone thinking, even folks who are my friends, I've never voted for them thinking that I'm not going to have to get in the ring and square up with them politically as it pertains to the issues that are important to my community. So I'm always forcing elected officials and candidates for office to speak to my issues, because my issues are always relevant to whatever American election, because there is no country without Black people, period.
Period. Thank you for that, Devin. I wanted to pause to just let everybody know, please share this conversation on your Facebook. Please follow the Southern AIDS Coalition. We are excited about this conversation today. My next question will be for Devin. I have political aspirations. At some point, I'm wrestling with God now, and we are in an argument about when would that happen and where would that happen, of course. But Devin, we know that you have ran for office as a young person. Tell us about your experience, just very briefly, but also for another young Black LGBTQ person that would like to run for office, what advice would you give them?
I would not recommend running during a pandemic. very,
that changes the whole.
Would not recommend. Okay. Would not recommend at all. No, hate to see it. I literally announced my candidacy a week before the world shut down. And so lost about 2.5, 3 months of campaigning. The original election date got shifted twice. And so it was very much a roller coaster. And I remember, on election day, feeling like, I left it all on the field. And I did. And we were able to come in third place out of 5 candidates. And so I'm still very proud of the race that we run. People saw my friends, Black, queer, trans people living with HIV, knocking on doors, canvassing for Devin Barrington-Ward and speaking about the issues that are important to them. And that was the center of the campaign. And so I would encourage, of course, run, absolutely. Look at the people that are currently leading, and you'll see that you are abundantly qualified to serve in these particular political offices. Hell, my 12-week-old standard poodle puppy is probably more qualified than members of Congress to lead this country. And so with that being said, I think the question shouldn't be whether you should run. It should be why shouldn't you run? And reasons to not run, of course, are if you're having challenges with your health, if you are having challenges with your finances, if you are trying to figure out how you're going to schedule that in with your family and your partner and your significant other. Those are things that you definitely need to have conversations about, and maybe reasons why you decide not to run. But reasons like, oh, I'm not qualified, reasons like I don't know enough, reasons like I don't have the look, reasons like that are very based in superficial respectability politics is not the reason to not run for public office. The reasons to run are you passionate? Do you have an issue that you care about? Do you have a constituency that you represent? Do you have people who are willing to volunteer and support you? How are you going to raise money? What issues are you going to amplify? Those are the questions that are really important when you're running for office. The questions that aren't important, like, oh, can I win? Oh, am I respectable enough? Do I have the look? Do I have the connections? The shape of politics in this country is shifting in so many ways, and in a lot of ways. I think now is the time where people are craving candidates who are willing to speak truth to power, who are willing to stake out positions that are not necessarily moderate and centrist in their values and belief systems, but are speaking directly to the rock. I think an amazing example of that is incoming Congresswoman Cori Bush from what's the state? Minnesota. From Minnesota, who is a Black woman, a single mother, someone who knows what it's like to be on public assistance, someone who knows what it's like to actually have been in the streets, someone who knows what it's like to pay more than $750 in taxes, right? And someone who's willing to speak truth to power in a way that other Black politicians in her area were not willing to do. And people recognize that the jig is up. We're not going for, you coming around every time it's election season with a few proclamations and some resolutions. Where is the substantive legislation? Turkey giveaways are not enough anymore. We need policy. We need money so that we can build institutions in our own community so that we can take some steps away from having to always rely on the government for things, and reshift that relationship of the government not necessarily being our savior, but a government being a partner to Black communities as we are futures. And so we have to elect elected officials. And some of those folks are not always going to be Black, right? You can be a non-Black person that has a Black politic, right? Because we know a lot of Black politicians, all of our skin folk and our kinfolk, a lot of Black politicians who have sold our communities upriver, former mayors like Kasim Reed, who handed Atlanta on a platter to corporate interests, and why we have seen the degradation of Black communities. And so when we are talking about what it looks like to run for office, it is us. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. The last thing that I will say is that there's not a politician in any city in America that moves more like how the people, has more power than the people power. And so if you are looking to run for office, you must recognize in this moment that you are merely a tool of your community. You are merely a weapon that is being wielded by your community to defend and to build. And if you don't view yourself in that context, then running for office in this age, I don't believe it's for you.
Devin, would you suggest that the Black Futurist group is a group that if young Black folks that identify LGBTQ could approach to receive some type of technical assistance or capacity?
Absolutely. We do trainings all the time on legislative advocacy right now. We're really excited that we will be working with the Black AIDS Institute for the next 6 months or so, helping them, their organizations and BTN chapters build advocacy plans and how to develop trauma-informed public policy. And also, we definitely know how to do candidate training, voter mobilization, GOTV efforts, and really just increasing people's capacity to be able to engage in the political system and build power for our communities overall. So please reach out to the Black Futurist group. It's Black Futurist. There's an S, there's multiple futurists. I'm not the only one. And so please visit us online and social media and all the things, because we want to be able to support people as they build out a new vision for their communities in the future.
Good. Devin, you've provided a model for us on both sides. One of a young person running for office. I have observed your excellence for years in the way that you have mobilized wherever you've been. But you've showed us a side of not occupying that seat that you were running for. One would believe that you would give up, go to the House, but following you on Facebook, you have still hit the pavement every single day. And so what advice, and I will ask Jasmine and Bishar, after sometimes what appears to be defeat, how do we keep going? We do not know what the results will be on Tuesday. How do we keep going after this? Devin, I want to hear from you first, and then Jasmine and Bishar, definitely want to hear from you.
Well, you know, Black people, we are going to win regardless of what happens on Tuesday. Like, my salvation is not tied up in any U.S. president. And I would encourage Black people to also recognize that as well, is that like our salvation is not tied up in this. We will be all right. And so like either way, I'm winning. As a Black person, I've got my melanin intact, and my ancestors are watching over me. So I know that I'm winning. One thing I will say after the election is, you know, I thought I was going to do my Hillary Clinton into the woods thing. You know, somebody might see me in Piedmont Park. Didn't you just run for office? Oh my gosh. But 2 days later, the Atlanta Police Department killed Bishar Brooks in a Wendy's parking lot. And so there was no time for me to be down in the dumps about what had happened with my race for state Senate. I immediately had to get in the streets and start mobilizing again. And so in some ways, I'm blessed that I had the tenacity and the courage and the connection to my ancestors like Paul Bogle and Moses Bogle, who are my great-great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-uncle, who led a rebellion in Jamaica in October, actually this month, in 1865 against the British government for the treatment of Black folks on the island, and were named national heroes because of that for Jamaica. And they gave their lives. And so I carry that same energy and tenacity with me. And so after my Senate run, when APD decided they were going to kill a Black father who had said that I could walk home, a Black father who they could have called an Uber or a Lyft for home, a Black father who was not belligerent and spoke with them for 20 to 30 minutes before they decided to gun him down. When I saw that, I knew that I had no time to sit back and somehow be sad about what happened with my Senate run. It was time to roll up my sleeves and continue to do the work. And so I'm very blessed that I have a platform through the Black Futurists group with our collaboration with Movement for Black Lives and all the other organizations that we're lucky to work with, that I was able to continue all of the things that I was talking about on my Senate run through the Black Futurists group and continue to build Black futures. Because regardless of whether I'm a state senator or I'm on city council or I'm just Devin Barrington-Ward, we are going to get freedom and liberation in our lifetime if I have anything to do with it. And I'm not waiting on a Senate seat or any political position to get that done. The work starts and always continues now.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you so much. To my other panelists, where do we, we started this conversation off saying we're watching particular races. What if those candidates that we want do not get in office? On the other side of defeat, how do we move forward?
For me, I think that we have to, well, it's layered for me. So for one, we need to understand that as Black people, who wins elections and races is just a part of it, right? There's so much that we're fighting against as a people, and so much that we're trying to regain as a culture. And we'll always be in that because we're going to always be navigating through this system called politics, which is basically white supremacy. So we're going to be in this race forever. So, and I don't mean the race of elections and even national elections, but we'll be in this fight forever. So knowing and understanding that the small battles are wins, and sometimes even those losses are lessons learned. And I think that we should use this as a time to be inspired, right? But I know that a lot of people will feel down about if the candidate does not win. But I think that if you continue to vote, like there's so many, when you vote on your local elections, like, and you're always out, and I've had so many friends run, that's a part of it. That's a part of life. Everybody doesn't win the actual election, but the connections that you make, that's the power right there. That's what we have as Black people, is internal power. No title or nothing that a white man can give you can make you a powerful Black person. You are already a powerful Black person. So being connected to each other, even if that is networking, however we can connect to each other, however we can connect to our spirituality, is the bigger win. And that's how we're going to get to liberation. And then we got to understand, to truly be liberated, we have to have a full understanding, clarity about where we came from. So that's an even bigger fight and battle to fight. So we can't mix all of those things together. We got to keep focused on what's in the front of us. And we have always taken care of each other. Our ancestors have always watched over us. And we will be all right, like Devin said. But we got to be inspired to push harder.
Baby, Reverend Jasmine, come on here now. Put your cash app up, because you have just preached something in here. Returning back to liberation, no matter who wins this election, because we still have work to do. Bishar, I want to get this question is, what is liberation for us? Black LGBT folks, what is going to be liberation for us? And Bishar, you can take that first lead.
Sure. So the way I imagine liberation is eliminating patriarchy. We are right now like just living under just the weight of what toxic patriarchy and masculinity looks like in practice, and it is destructive. And you literally have people that are out here that are making voting decisions based on who appears strongest and who appears more masculine and who's, strong. When those are the exact things that have caused us to be in the problems that we're in, when we see these, this bravado that that not just this president exudes, but so many men in politics exude. And it's been the basis for so many terrible decisions, whether it be wars, whether it be folks in their how they view reproductive freedom and reproductive justice, whether it be how we view inter-community violence as well. Look, we have two people in the Supreme Court who are woefully unprepared to handle cases when it comes to community violence, of which LGBTQ folks are disproportionately impacted. When we look at Brett Kavanaugh and Clarence Thomas, both of whose histories with sexual harassment and sexual violence, it's that particular construct within American politics, but also just within society, that is destructive. And so I think when I think of liberation, I think of deconstructing toxic masculinity, patriarchy, but also like recreating systems and structures that work for us. So systems of care and compassion, and systems of where everyone has access to healthcare, education, where everyone has access to transportation, reproductive justice and reproductive access. Like, this is not just about deconstructing, it's about building up what should be.
I love that. And I want to jump in and say it's also about abolishing what's already in place. It ain't right. We got to shut it down. It's no more. We can't keep moving and making and begging and pleading. Like, we need to be ultimately trying to dismantle all these systems of oppression. And we can make do in the meantime with, what we got. But I think that's what separates our vote as well, too, because some of us are hoping for liberation, and liberation looks different for everybody, right? So I think what we have to do that's important is make the implicit explicit, right? We have to all talk about what we really want to see and what liberation looks like to us. Because if me and you don't have the same outlook on what liberation is, we can't move the same, right? And that's what it's all about. It's not saying we're gonna all agree on everything. We never will. We're too great of a people and too evolved in how we think as a people, right? So we'll never all agree, but we need to agree with the processes, and we need to agree with how we show up for each other and how we support our people. But making the implicit explicit is important, right? Because so many times in the Black community, there's so much we hold on to that we never speak about, and it shows up in our voting as well.
Wow. Devin,
yeah, I think liberation is definitely, self-determination. When Black people can really determine for ourselves where we are going and who we are. I love Dr. Daniel Black, the author of The Coming, and a professor at Clark Atlanta University, who talks about when Black people when we're clear on who we are, the world changes. And I think that clarity invokes a certain level of self-determination, right? When we have the keys to our own future and our own destiny, when we recognize that there's no boxes that people can put us in, when we don't put ourselves in boxes, when we are liberated in our sex, when we are liberated with our dollars, when we are liberated with how we treat one another, when we are liberated in our family connections and bonds, when we are liberated in the ways in which we deal with our community members, when we are liberated with the ways in which we confront violence, when we're liberated with the ways in which we confront conflict with one another, and when we're liberated with our faith. I think all of that yields to a liberation in our politics that allows for us to imagine a future that is not influenced and impacted by the thoughts and the opinions of a white supremacist American construct, right? And I believe that doesn't mean that Black people have to leave here in order to have that. We built this thing. And so I believe that when we are very clear on who we are, the world will change. And so now is the time to get that clarity. Now is the time to start drawing lines in the sand. Now is the time to start defining what does it mean to vote in defense of Black lives. Now is the time to start making it clear that like either you are for us or you are against us, that we are not going to negotiate on our freedom and our safety anymore. That those things are not up for debate, it's not up for negotiation. Either you're going to do this or you're not. And if you don't do this, then you're not with us and you got to move on. And so that's the type of carrying on that I'm looking for right now. The young lady who went viral in Kansas City, reading out the entire Kansas City Council or whatever commission that was, is exactly the type of energy I have right now. And Marvell, you've known I've had that energy for quite some time, because I think it's now is the time we start interrogating these institutions that we've held to such esteem and say, well, why? Why do we hold these elected officials and these people with these titles in such high regard when they haven't done anything honorable, when they haven't done anything that has centered the needs of us, then they haven't done anything that has shown that they care about our communities? Why? Why do we continue to extend courtesies? Why do we continue to make excuses? Why do we continue to allow them to get away with the BS? And why do we continue to justify it to ourselves and come up with a rhyme, reason, excuse for why we continue to collude with our own oppression? I am done colluding with oppression. I'm done with it.
Something smells different. Let me explain myself. There is an aroma about this election cycle. There is an aroma about community that smells different this season. What is that?
We know that we have to. Well, I smell it. And a part of it is because we know that it's what it is. Malcolm X said it best. Baby, listen, I love when chickens come home to roost. Okay, and the chickens are coming home to roost because white people are now seeing what happens when you cut off your nose to spite your face. When you continue to collude with racism, when you continue to make excuses for racism, it allows for now the entire country, right? All of these talking heads about on CNN and MSNBC and their heads on fire the first debate. What did you expect? All the Black people I know were like, nothing about this was shocking. We know who this man was. We knew who he was when he was doing the Central Park Five. We knew who he was when he was discriminating against folks for housing in New York back in the 80s and the 90s. We knew who he was when he was colluding with birtherism. We knew who he was. And now everybody is seeing, oh my God, we are in the middle of a pandemic. 200,000 Americans have died. The economy is going to shit. Excuse my language. The economy is going to hell in a handbasket. All of these things because of y'all, because of who you have decided to support, because of who you decide to champion, because who you decide to celebrate. And so now Americans, but particularly white Americans, have to look themselves in the mirror and say, my God, this is the monster that I have created. And Black people get to sit back and say, yeah, absolutely. And we tried to show you this when Black women had to save Alabama from itself because they were literally willing to send a child molester to Washington, D.C. because it was Black folks that had some moral authority that said absolutely not, even when white folks said that they would not. And so I think that this is what I am smelling is the chickens coming home to roost. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I love when the talking heads on CNN are like, what's happening with America? Because guess what? We have been asking those questions for 20, 30 years. I was asking those questions when I was 10 years old in the 2000 election. I'm gonna take y'all back. None of this is new. 2000, we saw this nonsense, right? We saw this nonsense with them steal an election. We saw it in 2018. They stole an election from a Black woman. Let's be clear. Black people have always seen where this country is going. And now everybody else is starting to see it. And they're starting to recognize, how did I contribute to the creation of this monster? And I love it. I love it.
I love it too. I'm smelling a couple of aromas. Sometimes, right, I'm like, I'm with you on, we've been seeing it, but I think that the only thing that's good is the Black uprising is so strong. And I'm inspired by what we are about to do as Black people. But as far as like the election, it's just, it's almost disheartening to watch like the debate. This last debate, I felt so good because I'm like, you know what? Somebody taught them some home training, because even Biden was like, he was letting Trump just pull him in the first debate. And I'm like, really? Like, this is what it's come to, but this is what it's always been, right? So like I said earlier, making the implicit explicit. So I enjoy seeing people come out and be their real self, especially in politics, right? But what we're seeing just is not the best thing to look at. But we are seeing these people really show up as themselves. Some of the conversations that have been had during these debates have just been like shockingly, or some of the response has just been so shocking that it's like, wow, but this is what it's always been. And I'm hopeful that us seeing it right out will help us step up and lean into our leadership as a people even more, so that we can really try to grab a hold of what's going on over the next 8 years, right? I'm looking at the next 10 years. Because whoever gets in office this time, there's so much to fix and so much to put in place. I'm trying to see I'm trying to plan on where I want to see us 10 years from now, 8 years from now, not just in a year or two.
So I think, we talked about what is different for our generations, and I think we can sum it up that we're in between 20s and 30s on this conversation. We cannot forget about the people, the generations before us who are still with us. How do we keep them engaged? And I don't want to make this an ageist conversation, but I'm sure our previous generation too had conversations as such to stay engaged and to keep young people engaged. How do we not forget about generations before us who came through the civil rights movement and who have seen models of this uprising?
We got to keep them a part of the movement, right? That's what I was talking about earlier. The connectivity of our movements is important, and intergenerational relations and intergenerational leadership within our movements is important, because we need to know where we've been to know where we're going, right? And I always talk about the Black Panthers, and that's where I get my passion for political education, right? We still have to learn from our ancestors, and as Black people, Nowhere in the invisible handbook of being Black did you go against the ancestors, right? You're going to always follow the lead of your ancestors, right? It's pretty invisible. The white man wanted it to be invisible. We're everything we're doing is connected to our experiences as Black people, connected to our feelings, and we just got to connect to our elders, especially the ones that are here that can speak to our movements. I'm not going to say what the elders need to do because that's not for me to say. But, you know, we have to connect to them and we have to be open to receive it. And we got to impart that knowledge that we learn from them to the young people in a way that's specifically crafted for them. That's what our duty is. Our duty is to continue messaging that is adapted through generations, because it's hard for the generation before us to speak to the generation after us. But if we can serve as mediators in carrying those messages, as we did in slavery when we sung hymns, if we can carry the messages and make it specific to the young people, then they will engage.
So I would say, you know, when thinking about elders and older generations, I think that we should actually lean into the tension between generations. There's always been tension between old folks and young folks, and this whole politics versus protest sort of dynamic. And I think that's actually pretty helpful. I think, you know, I feel like when I think about just the older generations and how they subscribe to, you know, politic of respectability. And, you know, a lot of us are calling out that generation and saying that that didn't work. It's never worked. And I think that there's been some, you know, there's been some movement on that. People are realizing the limitations of that. And so I think there's ways to engage and there's ways to have conversation and to bring those uncomfortable truths to the table and still be headed in the same direction towards liberation. These are conversations that we have to be willing to have amongst ourselves in community and really embrace, realizing that they aren't necessarily, they're not deficiencies within our path towards liberation. I think they actually aid and abet us towards liberation, because it actually forces us to have tough conversations about class, for example, or about sexuality, all these cross-cutting issues. And so I think we need to lean into that.
I agree with that as well. I think a lot about it with the divide, as we are leading a campaign here to divest from the Atlanta Police Department and reimagine public safety through the investment of Black communities in our wellness and institutions that are grounded in transformative justice. When we're having these conversations, there oftentimes is an age divide. And it is not something that I'm uncomfortable having the discussion with, because one, I recognize, I think first, we have to come into these conversations not demonizing one another. That's first. We have to recognize that as Black people, that we can have spirited debate. We should have spirited debate. We should have discourse, but we don't always agree, because that's how we learn. Conflict is an opportunity to grow and learn together. And I think a lot of times, particularly some of our leaders, we're very conflict avert. And we think that if there's conflict amongst Black leaders, that somehow that means that Black people are not being served. And I don't believe that we all have to be on the same page in order for us to be served. There has to be a multitude of strategies, opinions, perspectives, belief systems, and approaches that get us towards liberation in our lifetime. Notice I said liberation in our lifetime. I'm not trying to just do liberation work for a future generation. I want to achieve liberation. I want to see it. I want to taste it. I want to feel it. I want to embody it. I want to experience it. It's something that I've been chasing since I was a child. And I believe that it's something that I will experience before I leave this earth. And so with that being said, I also think, though, that when we have that age divide, we have to also call a thing, right? That sometimes our propensity to believe that the police is the entity that's going to save us. It's grounded in some respectability politics. It's grounded in some classism, that Black people with money do sometimes have a different experience with law enforcement than Black people who are in communities that don't have money. And we have to speak about that, and we have to call a thing, and we have to be uncomfortable with it. But the fact of the matter is that there are many Black people in many communities who do see the police as a foreign occupation force. And oftentimes those communities typically are communities that don't have a lot of resources, that don't have a lot of funding, and look very different from some of the more affluent Black communities that oftentimes do have a different relationship with the police. But here's the kicker: let you be caught on the wrong side of town, and in the right car and the right skin complexion with the right money or the right degree or not the right degree, you are still a Black person at the end of the day. And so we have to also recognize that to be true as well. And so that's just one conversation that I think oftentimes highlights the age divide. But I think we have to get to, well, what do we all want at the end of the day? Do we want to feel safe? Right. Do we want to feel safe? Do we want to feel whole? Do we want to feel protected? Well, there are numerous ways to do that that don't involve the expansion of the carceral state and the criminal legal system. And we have to be willing and open to hear and explore and interrogate those opportunities, right? Because it's all opportunities. We can't ignore the fact that there are going to be Black women who have been victims of domestic violence who may have a different perspective on why defunding the police may not be the right aspect or the right avenue, right? But also we have people who have been victims of intimate partner violence who also can tell you how the police did not serve them and it made the situation worse. And we also have to make space for that as well. And so I think intergenerational conflict is an opportunity for intergenerational dialogue. And if we stop the dialogue, then we stop growing as a people, because we miss and we lose our ancestral connection and we lose our connection to our elders as young people who have to be in a role of teaching, who have to be in a role of providing context, who have to be in a role of reminding us to remember where we have come from and who we are. Our resiliency is found in the face of our elders, because they're the folks who have continued to persist, because everything in this country that is attached to this white supremacist system was not meant for you to survive. And so the fact that when I see an old Black person, I celebrate. Even if we don't agree on everything, I celebrate, because you're not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here, but you really not. When I see, particularly because I don't oftentimes see a lot of old Black men, I think it's common for me to see older Black women. I don't oftentimes see old Black men. I oftentimes celebrate when I see a 70 or 80-year-old Black man, because I'm like, wow, you aren't supposed to be here and you're here. When I live in my community where I live in, Bankhead, our life expectancy is 65 and a half. If I move to Buckhead, my life expectancy goes up to almost 90. So when I see Black people who are elders, even when I don't agree with them, even when they have some respectability politics that come out their mouth, I still celebrate the fact that they are here, because they were not meant to survive in this system.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Devin. I'm going to bring another guest of ours in, Cherisse Scott from SisterReach in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm going to give her the same question, allow her to do her introduction, but I'm going to ask you, Cherisse, about intergenerational leadership. You know, we are considered a younger generation, but we have elders who are still among us, who have went through movements as such, different templates, but kind of still the same journey. How do you recommend we have those conversations and bring them along this movement of politics and policy and protest?
Well, hey, y'all, I'm so glad to be here, and was coming off of one call and another panel. I'm glad to be here in this panel. Well, first of all, I think it's important. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And we wouldn't be where we are. I wouldn't be able to sit here in my nice office if it were not for the 12 Black women who started this framework of reproductive justice, right? And just because our folks are aging doesn't mean we need to put them out to pasture, right? We need to honor them. We need to respect them. And not only is it important for us to bring them along, it's imperative for us to bring them along, because they have historical information that we just don't have. They were there when we weren't there, right? Some of the same programs and projects, even down to the name of this organization, was something that was started by, and it was a name of a program that our elders in the Black Women's Health Project started before SisterReach was ever, conceived as an organization. It was a program that was a part of the Black Women's Health Project and Black Women's Health Imperative out of DC. I didn't know that until those elder sisters like Billy Avery talked to me and told me about it. They were like, baby, we enjoyed that you were trying to do what you was trying to do. We just want to support you, right? So, and even down to the civil rights movement and the passing of the baton, or, many times us indicting our community of not passing the baton. But see, now we're in the leadership seat, and we see how exhausting this work is. Yeah. We know exactly how hard it is to cultivate new leadership to bring them into the work that we are doing, right? And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of check that, right? Apologize, to be quite honest, and make sure that not only are we bringing our elders into the work that we are trying to do now, but to make sure that we can have a bit of a check and balance and have a vantage point, because there's going to be people who need to be reached. There are folks who are, now I'm in my mid 40s, now I'm in the middle, I'm somewhere between the millennials and the baby boomers, but I'm about to be the age, of the baby boomers. Now I'm in the age of the leadership in Memphis, Tennessee. These are folks who are running the state right now, are in their 40s and 50s and 60s. You know what I'm saying? So we've got to have a little bit more respect and honor for what it means to not only do some level of check and balance and bring our people with us, but to make sure that historical knowledge, the knowledge of even the 12 Black women who founded the work that I do, that is not lost in the wash, because we've got to be able to use that blueprint, if you will, in order to move all of our work forward. Our liberation is tied to one another. My liberation is tied to my grandmother's liberation. My liberation is tied to my mother, who is now deceased, liberation. But let's just be clear. My mama asked me to start SisterReach, and she's not even here to benefit from all of the things that SisterReach can do in the community that she thought was important to be invested in, right? It was her ask that I start this organization to make sure that Black mamas and children would be centered, would not be abandoned, because she was abandoned, because she wasn't centered when she was raising us right here in Memphis, Tennessee, right? So it is my reasonable service to make sure that I continue to honor her legacy by continuing to honor the fact that it was her. This is a picture behind me, as a matter of fact, that it was her ask for me to start this organization. And when I'm getting tired, and when I'm ready to move on, and when it's time for me to step down and move this leadership over to a younger person or somebody else who's got the energy to move it forward into the next decade or the next, area of change, that they can do that with all of the tools that maybe those who came before us just didn't have the infrastructure or the know-how to fully pass along, right? But we have far more access than they have, and we have a responsibility to make sure that our communities and our young people get something more than what they were able to give.
I appreciate you so much for uplifting that. One of the things, as you were saying, that I want to bring into the conversation as well is, I think purity politics is going to be our downfall. When we all like to come into the space as if we are not complicit in someone's oppression. Literally, if you live in this country, you're complicit in someone's oppression, you don't even know. Right? When we are all not the next best social justice activists of the year. We don't all have the best answers. We don't always stand in our Black queer feminist politic that we claim to uplift. Sometimes we say things that are not always in alignment with the reproductive justice framework. Sometimes we say things that's not always in alignment with a reimagined perspective of public safety. And we have to make space for those contradictions. I think oftentimes where those intergenerational dialogues go left is when we try to approach the conversation as younger activists as being perfect, as if we have all of the answers, as if we are always grounded in a perfect politic, as if all of our words and all the things that we say and the rhetoric that we always live up to that. And that's just not the truth. And so I think when we are honest about who we are, and we recognize that, yes, you may want to see the downfall of the capitalist system, but if you got an iPhone, you have participated in supporting capitalism. I think, we have to be real about who we really are. We have to be real about the fact that while many of us want to see these very vast changes in our communities, that sometimes we are walking contradictions, and I think sometimes we hold older folks to a standard that oftentimes is not fair, that they will always, that doesn't give them the lens or the opportunity to progress and grow in their understanding in politics. And if we don't extend that to them, then we won't have that extension when we are lucky enough to be their age, and to be considered elders. And I don't always want to be held to that standard, because I know that my politic has progressed. I didn't wake up and come out my mama's womb a Black Panther. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not my Black politic group.
I think that
there was some anti-black notions that I had to shed. And when we are not honest about that, and we like to come into this thing like we've always had it right, people can see through that, and it turns people off, and it makes people not want to be involved and engaged.
I just want to add, I totally agree with what Devin said. I think it goes with both ends, with people having their feelings. But I think the biggest thing is money and class is where we start to lose the direction of those conversations, because, oftentimes we naturally honor our ancestors just in the Black community, right? But when our experiences come into play, the younger generation just has a lot more privilege, because of money, because of class, and because of how the world has evolved. So I think that our experiences are different because of that, and we kind of get lost in that. I think that something else we have to remember is the term or the framework is intergenerational. A lot of organizations want to have older people at the forefront and bring young people in and try to, guide their leadership. Or there are young people that try to bring older people in and guide their leadership. But if we're truly supporting Blackness in its totality, then every part of the movement speaks to every age of a Black person, right? We're not just fighting for Black people that are 25 or 35, because they will eventually be 45 and 55, right? But that's why it's so important to pour into the children and to pour into the young people, because as they grow, their politic will grow, and they will be able to speak better because the voice will grow, and they will control their narrative.
Cool.
I mean, for the first time since the history of our organization, I've got 3 staffers on my board, on my staff that are over 60, right? Never before had I realized how much we talked about mamas and babies in this kind of younger. I wasn't even. It was just it was going over my head, and they were like, "And so what? What does SisterReach have for us?" And I was like, "Huh." I felt so bad, right? Didn't even realize, because you have blinders unknowingly, complicit in invisibilizing the generations before us, right? All 3 of them old enough to be my mom, and I'm so glad that they're here, so glad that they're here to help us think through and be even more intentional about how we center their lives as older women, right? Old enough, who are grandmamas, right? So just wanted to add that to the conversation too.
On November the 4th, we will all wake up, or we would have stayed up all night. What is next for our organizations? What is next for our personal initiatives? I recognize that the response of that is dependent upon who is in the White House, but hypothetically speaking, we have the candidate that we want, whoever that is. On November the 4th, when you wake up, what is your mission?
My mission doesn't change regardless of whether it's Biden or Trump.
Yeah, we're going to keep doing our work. Yeah.
In there, I got to keep fighting for Black people. That's all of our mission. We got to keep fighting for us. That fight does not end. I really want people to recognize It does not matter who gets in there on November 4th. Our job continues. The work that we were doing, to uplift the life of Breonna Taylor continues. The work that we were doing to uplift the life of George Floyd continues. The work that we were doing to uplift the life of Rayshard Brooks continues. The work that we were doing to uplift the life of Black trans women like Monica Roberts and others continues. We don't stop working. And so nothing changes for us on November 4th, because guess what? If Joe Biden gets in there, the police are still going to have overinflated budgets. We're still going to be locking up people, Black people, for crimes that white folks never get locked up for. We're still going to have a healthcare system that is inequitable. Even if we expand Medicaid, there's still going to be challenges in the medical system because Black people have historically had challenges with the medical system beyond money. We're talking about trust, right? The Tasaki experiments, there are still Black people in Atlanta who can talk about having relatives that were a part of the Tuskegee experiments. That has nothing to do with the ACA. That has nothing to do with Medicaid. That's all about trust. And you can't policy that. You can't politicize that. You can't legislate that. Trust is trust. And so we still have work to do. So it doesn't matter who gets in there on the 4th. I think what does matter is recognizing the type of polarization that we are in this country and what that means for Black people and how we will keep ourselves safe in this time where we have white militia members that are openly talking about kidnapping governors and overturning state governments. I think that is what matters after November 4th, because make no mistake about it, people will be in the streets regardless of who wins.
Yeah.
Right. And we still have work to do because Breonna Taylor still has not gotten justice. George Floyd didn't get justice. Over the 20 Black trans women that have been killed this year and last year have not received justice. Yes. So what are we really celebrating on November 4th other than, okay, we got a new president? I appreciate my time living in DC, particularly in Southeast, because it made me have a appreciation for, the fact that as being Black, we really, how moved should we be by these things? Because, on the other side of the river, the day after Donald Trump got elected, it felt like the day after 9/11. And in Southeast, life kept going because Black people were like, well, y'all always send y'all terrible presidents here. So what's new for us?
Right. I think for me, the work does not change. But for me as a Black trans woman, the work has to become more intensified because there's no narrative about the murders against Black trans women right now, right? So imagine the emptiness we feel, the emptiness we feel when we see what is going on with Breonna Taylor. Imagine the level of emptiness that Black trans women face every day when we lose. There was just a Black trans woman murdered here in Memphis. There's an emptiness and there's a numbness, right? So for me, the work becomes intensified no matter who wins, because we're in a spot where we as Black trans women, we're the underdog and we're the underbelly. We're the underbelly of the murders against Black bodies because we're not spoken about. So for me, the work has to be intensified. I think another part of the work is unifying Black communities in these intersections, because we talk a lot about supporting each other, but there's still movements in silos and people are, supporting each other for the looks. And I think that it's time for Black people to truly support each other, how our ancestors have. That's another reason why we need to have the ancestors, because they can show us the way to support each other in their full Blackness. That's something that we don't really experience now. We have so many identities, and our identities as Black people have evolved, right? And what used to be called white folk shit is now how Black people live life and think life and speak. So we got to be able to connect that. And I think that's where my work will lie, no matter who wins. But we hoping Biden wins.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that, even when COVID-19 happened, we were like, okay, how can we shift? Of course, we do policy work. We work on the local, the state, and the federal level. But I was very, interested in what was about to happen to the young people who would never be able to leave the house and go to school, and then would be, left in the house all day with their molester. trying to figure out the more practical ways that we can support our kids, support our people right now for the things that they need, right? Marrying more daily practical support, more direct service to some of the things that we've been able to do on a state level more. We were already trying to figure out how to be even more engaged locally here in Memphis, right? When our work often takes us away to bring attention to Tennessee, but doesn't always allow us to be at home, especially me, to be at home on the ground working as much as I wanted to be working when I initially started SisterReach. So even down to making sure folks got food, can pay utilities, can, get to and fro from work. These are just very right now needs, just trying to figure out the best ways to support our families, in the kind of daily right now things, because I'll be real, folks who were homeless on the 3rd are going to be homeless on the 4th. Right, folks who were getting ostracized because of their sexual orientation from their churches on the 3rd will yet be ostracized on the 4th. White evangelicals who were in power on the 3rd will still be in power on the 4th. And so we still got to do our work. We still got to make sure our people have what they need. And we still have to show up and even more, like Jasmine is saying, and intensify that work, and keep moving that work forward, and really being even more apologetic. And I think that we have an opportunity, because I think we've seen some very real divisiveness within the Black community right now during this time, that we've seen with the movement for Black Lives work, a very hardcore division between queer Black lives and cis Black lives. This is an opportunity I think that we have to work together, and finally address what these ills are looking like. Our proximity to patriarchy and why we think that's sexy. Right, our proximity to privilege, and why we're not willing to put a mask on and make sure that we keep our neighbors safe. Those are the things I want to be talking about. I want to be talking about the things that, and we'll continue to talk about those things. This Black folk on this call, I feel like we know the things that are happening in our communities, and we know that on November the 4th, we'll still be abandoned. And so we still got to be working to advance our communities in the ways that we know how, that have continued to work for us, because we've been maintaining in a state of abandonment since we were brought onto this soil.
Fake.
Yeah, so I think certainly what I'm thinking about in my work, working on the Hill, is that right now we're like strategizing. When I say we're, I mean me and a couple of my colleagues who are also fellows on the Hill, coming up with priorities for the next Congress. So, certainly as a Black LGBTQ person, our issues need to be on the agenda for this incoming Congress. And as far as I'm concerned, we have 2 incoming Black gay men that are going to be elected to Congress, but that's not going to mean anything if our issues aren't addressed, if there aren't hearings on the violence that Black trans women face day in and day out, if there aren't hearings on HIV infection rates, if there aren't hearings on all the issues that impact us, it won't matter if we have this added representation. And so for me, I'm already strategizing, engaging stakeholder groups, advocacy groups, to really make sure that their voices are heard in Congress, and that members of Congress know that that folks expect for our issues to be heard. And even though I'm there in my official capacity, that I intend to use my fellowship and the extent that I can to raise the issues that impact me. And also, I think this is a vehicle for accountability. This is really what we need to do post November 3rd. And even if Joe Biden wins, he's talking about creating a national commission. That's not nearly enough. Commissions, they come up with the report, they do research, and they provide recommendations on what things should be done. That's woefully insufficient, like point blank. And we need to tell him that now and after the election if he wins. So like these are, we've been holding these politicians' feet to the fire forever. We're going to keep doing that no matter if Joe Biden wins or Donald Trump wins, that's always going to happen. And I don't want people to get demoralized if Trump wins again. Sure, that night or whenever we find out if he wins, it might be rough, but next day it's back to the work again, keeping these folks responsible.
And if he doesn't win and he declares himself the winner, you occupy the streets. You turn the hell up. You tell people absolutely not. You make sure your county election office counts every damn vote. Don't let them play with your ballots. Make sure that when they're curing ballots that they call people, and if there's an I out of place, then make sure they call that person and say, hey, is there an I on your name? Do we need to cross that T to make sure that that ballot counts? Make sure your election officials count every vote, because this man is already setting it up to play games and declare himself the winner, even though all the votes won't be in. Do not allow the electors in your state, the people who actually make the vote official, to play with the popular vote in your state. If they cut up with this election, it is our responsibility, it is our duty to save this democracy, because while the democracy has not always worked for Black people, we know that if it absolutely goes to hell in a handbasket, we will be the first people on the chopping block. So I fully expect for people in Memphis, for people in Florida, for people in Atlanta and everywhere else to cut the fuck up in the streets if this man tries to steal this election.
Yes. We have had an exciting discussion. We got one more question before we close it out tonight, because we can keep this thing going. But I want to be mindful of time. What are we doing for self-care? 2020 has been a year for us. What are we doing to take care of ourselves? We are at Saving Ourselves virtual Black print. What are we doing to save ourselves, including taking care of our health, our wellness? What are we doing?
We've been raising money, to give the staff some time off. Let's just be clear. Wow. To shut the office down, okay? We were just thinking about, we have a fellow who lives in South Carolina who's here with us in Tennessee working, and she wanted to go home for the holidays. And I think she was trying to figure out what was going to happen with Thanksgiving or whatever. We were already 5 steps ahead of her, because we already knew that if she was going and any of us were engaging with our family members, there was going to have to be need for quarantine and all of those types of things. So we just built that right into the self-care piece. And we're giving our folks time off like right before Thanksgiving, definitely right after Thanksgiving. We'll have about a week in the office again or on Zoom for strategizing for 2021. And then I close my office down the last 2 weeks of the year anyway, every year. The ways that the sister who taught me how to do RJ work did when I worked for her, we're shutting it down. But then also, we're taking some, we're shutting it down. We're turning off emails. We won't be available. Right, because we need to be able to reset. We got to be able to be restored so that when we do come back in 2021 and we're right, in the midst of the legislative season, getting prepared for Black folks Day on the Hill one more time. We want to make sure that we're ready, that we're, and able to come with energy, right? Like I'm sitting here coughing and coming off the video right now, because my allergies are acting up and, overly tired and all of those types of things. So we're just trying to figure out the best ways to love on each other and love on ourselves. And then also even planning ahead for next year about some just off time, retreat time, and really using COVID-19 as an opportunity to step back and kind of turn down, although I feel like we've been going at full speed, since March. Like, I don't know that we've ever, really fully, me and my deputy director for sure, have not stopped. However, and I think it's something to be said about how Black folks don't think that we can stop, or, especially thinking about the ways that there's never any room for Black folks to get it wrong, to make mistakes, to need to take a break, to say stop, feeling like if we don't, keep moving, then funding is a potential that it wouldn't be there, or folks don't think that we're fully committed, all of those things. So, I mean, it's still the racism and the institutionalized foolishness that's happening here. In the meantime, if our bodies break down, what's going to happen? So we're stopping. I'm stopping, and my funding partners are in full agreement with me, and that's that on that. We stopping over here at SisterReach. That's what we're gonna be doing.
So if I could, because I got to jump off real quick, because I actually have to get to my self-care, which is my puppy. I have a standard poodle who's named after Stokely Carmichael. He is Stokely Kwame Barrington-Ward, and I love him so much. I also still find time. I made a commitment to get Black to nature. And so through the pandemic, I have been hiking. I have been in all of the different parks and nature preserves in and around Metro Atlanta, exploring, sitting by the water, doing all the things. And also a reminder that love in the midst of a pandemic and all the things is still possible. And so one of my aspects of my self-care is being with my girlfriend, who adores me, who allows me to be in my full queerness. And that is a part of my self-care routine. And every now and again, I scroll on Netflix. The Governor, all them shows from South Africa are so good. Oh my God, they are so good. The Governor on Netflix, yes. The Governor on Netflix, absolutely would recommend that. Very, very good. And Marvell, I just want to appreciate you so much because I've got to hop off, and all of the other panelists, thank you so much. I am sending nothing but love and good energy to you all between now and the end of time. And so I appreciate all of you all, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of the conversation this evening.
You did amazing, Devin. Amazing.
Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all. Y'all take care.
Jasmine and Bishar, two last comments. What is self-care looking like right now?
So for me and my staff, self-care, we are always practicing self-care. So we won't necessarily be stopping because we move at our own pace anyway. My staff kind of you wouldn't believe how I run. My staff comes in, I don't pressure them. They don't pressure me. We have a self-care room. We take naps during the day. We watch Girlfriends. When we eat lunch, we turn it on the TV, we watching Girlfriends. But more importantly, I am imploring my staff to really find out what self-care is for them. It's not just about what somebody told you to do, or you spending money, or you getting a pedicure. It's about what do you do to make you feel good, but also how do you pour into yourself. So another part of the self-care for my staff, we're all doing projects that are working on us personally. So for me, I'm working on my credit. I'm working on saving money because I see where the economy and the government has been and where it may be headed. So I want to be prepared for the fight in that way. And I'm imploring my staff to do the same. And therapy is important. We have therapists here for our participants all the time. And they tend to see our staff as well when we need them in emergency. So we're always practicing self-care, but I just want everybody out there to know self-care is about what you decide is best for you and what works for you. Because for real, for me, sometimes self-care is catching up on emails, and that's still work. But I might need to catch up on 100 emails. So if that's what's going to make I can't go to bed every night thinking about what I didn't do. So if in that time is taking care of some of their work business, sometimes there's self-care. So I just want everybody to always assess what self-care is for you and take care of yourself in that way.
Bishar?
Yeah, so self-care for me, wine, let's just be honest. Some Zinfandel, some Merlot, music has always been just very calming for me. And also there's nothing wrong with just getting in the car and just driving and not even having a destination in mind. Just, get on the highway and just get off at a random exit and just find yourself where you've never been before, and you discover a new neighborhood. That could be in the same city or in the same, county that you've never been to. And it's just very calming because literally sometimes just getting 10 minutes away feels like you could be, on vacation. If you're in a park that you've never been to, just, find your space. Find your space. It could be your house. It could be your car. I know, and speaking with my mom every day, that's also self-care. But also, like, for these parents that are navigating kids and school from home, like, that's particularly important. Find your space that's outside of the house. And if you can, however you get there, because you need your own space to really process and work through what's happening now, because this is not normal. So whatever you find works for you, go for it.
I wanted to thank our panelists so much tonight. Cherisse Scott from SisterReach, Jasmine Tasaki from WeCareTN. We had Devin Barrington-Ward, who had to depart early, from the Black Futurists plural group. Can be found all on Facebook, and Bishar Jenkins, who is a legislative fellow. I wanted to remind everyone that Election Day is November the 3rd. If you are looking at a mail-in ballot right now, you need to get it to the poll. Do not put it in the mail. We recommend or suggest that you get the ballot in person at a voting location. We cannot risk our mail getting lost or delayed at this point. We wanted to thank you all for watching tonight. This is the last of the series for the virtual Black print, and you can find out more about this amazing conference at the Southern AIDS Coalition website. I am grateful as the founder that this organization has willing to take this conference on. Thank you all for tonight. Please enjoy your Thursday night. Bye-bye.